afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and welcome to this season finale of the Future of Financial Information webinar series. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Song Ma from Yale School of Management, who will be the presenter today, and also Camille Hebert from University of Toronto, who will discuss. So incidentally, it's the second time in a row that we have a discussant from Toronto, but yeah, lots of smart people up there, obviously. So thank you both for joining, and really look forward to your presentations. Just procedural information. So Song has asked to present for 30 minutes straight, and that means we will have a Q&A session at the end, following Camille's discussion of about 15 minutes. So overall, the webinar will be 1 hour, but after that, we usually stay on for a little while to clear any remaining questions. But also, let me point out, you don't have to sit on your questions until the Q&A. Feel free to type them into the chat. So I will be keeping an eye on the chat to make sure that we come back to your questions later. And also, if it's a clarifying question, then I will try to sneak it in during the presentation. And so without further ado, Song, please, the screen is yours for 30 minutes. And you need to unmute yourself first.
Okay, wonderful. Can everybody see my screen and hearing me? Okay, perfect. First of all, I would like to thank Michael for inviting me to join this very wonderful webinar, and for Camille for agreeing to discuss this paper. She has seen several versions of this, I guess. Now it's time to actually give us some even longer feedback. So for those of you I've never met in person, I am Song. I'm assistant professor in finance at Yale School of Management. And the paper I'm presenting today is called Persuading Investors, a video-based study. And this is joined with my PhD student, Alan, who is third year in the PhD program. And I saw some of you, some of my old friend who's here, and also some of you I know either on Twitter or so on. So thank you very much for joining. So let me try to motivate the paper from a very simple perspective of how the finance market really functions. That is, many economic decisions are made after interpersonal persuasions. For example, in the finance world, one of the most prevalent type of persuasion is pitches. Corporate executives pitch the board in order to change corporate strategy. Startups pitch venture capitalists in order to get early stage funding. Sell-side analysts pitch the stocks in order to get some buy-in, and so on and so forth, okay? And when we think about how persuasion works in the financial markets, one thing that always jumps to us is, well, the content matters, of course, because, well, this content could be informational. That is, well, you get the NPV of a certain project, you get the product new features of the product, and so on and so forth. And those informational content could be used to persuade the receivers to take certain corporate decisions. At the same time, those content of the persuasion could be non-informational but quite impactful. For example, the framing of a certain specific content could matter for the final outcome as well, okay? So what we try to do in this paper is that we're going to try to introduce another omitted dimension in the persuasion process, which we think are pretty crucial. That is, the features in the persuasion delivery. When I say persuasion delivery, what I mean are your facial expressions, the tone of your voices, the specific word choices that might make you sound particularly sincere, engaging, and attractive, okay? And then the question that we're going to ask in this paper are twofold. At the very beginning, we're going to ask, well, do those delivery features matter for economic decision-making at all? Even though it is widely believed that all those things like how you sound, how you look, and the specific way that you say certain things might matter. But in a setting with professional investors, okay, do we actually see this happening? Okay, this is the first part or the starting point of this research. Then, as you will see, we're going to show the first part of the question as a yes answer. Then we're going to go into the second part of the paper, where we're going to ask, well, if those persuasion delivery features matter in economic decision-making, then what are the economic mechanisms? Do they lead to better investment decisions? Or this is a way actually to introduce costly biases, okay? And as you can see, if we want to study this question, one of the key empirical challenges has two of them. The first one is we need to observe and quantify the persuasion process and the delivery features. Even though we see each other and persuade each other every day very often, but how do we actually capture this whole process, okay? And how can we quantify the specific features that one presented through this process? And the second main challenge is, if you observe those persuasion features and so on, can you connect those persuasion process to the subsequent economic decision? What kind of settings do we really need in order to get such an inference set up? The way that we resolve these two challenges are the following. This is one of the first papers that we, as we understand, that are going to use a full video as the raw data input. I guess this is why I am in this Future of Financial Information webinar. That is, we believe, hopefully, video data is going to be a very crucial input in future financial decision making. And from the academic perspective, we think that using unstructured machine learning based framework to process and construct variables from video data is the key innovation of this paper. Specifically, for all the videos that comes into our algorithm, we will be able to look at the speaker's visual dimension, vocal dimension, and verbal dimension, and construct a system of measurement around them. Okay, for example, if you think about me either going through an interview or presenting in order to convince you that our paper is good and so on, you will be able to, using a raw video input, and construct all the measurement about how I behaved and how I presented in this process. And where can we actually find a setting where the persuasion is important and also we can connect it to the subsequent decision making? The way that we're going to do it is that we're going to use startup pitches as a setting. Specifically, we're going to look at thousands of pitches that startup made to incubator investors, where we can observe the pitch video in full. We can observe the subsequent investment decision made by the incubator investors, and we can follow up to see how those startup performed or conditional on funding. Those ways will help us to establish a lot of interpretation about what we find, okay? Let me give you a sense of the main findings. We have 4 of them. And the first one is we find persuasion delivery matters. We find that in the startup pitch setting, a more passionate, enthusiastic, and warm pitch, or in general, we call them a more positive pitch, are more likely to obtain funding. And that one standard deviation change increased the funding probability by 35.2. This is not explained by omitted quality variables saying, oh, the people who pitch better are just higher quality, and so on. In fact, our second finding speaks directly against that argument, because we find the delivery-driven decision associated with lower investment success. That is, we find conditional on funding, those favored pitch features, basically the passion, the enthusiasm, and warmth, correlates with a poor performance rather than better performance. I'm going to go into detail to discuss this and how we can interpret it, but this is speaking against that those warm pitch features are particularly relevant to help you to get a better investment outcome. And then in the third finding, we connect our paper to the recent discussion that Camille actually leads, which is the gender gap in entrepreneurship. And the question we ask is, are there differences in using those non-substantive, potentially bias leading delivery features to judge men versus women? And we find the answer is yes. We find that women are judged more on the non-substantive delivery, but when a woman and man co-present together, the women actually are essentially neglected, because we find when a man and a woman present together, the woman's delivery features no longer matter. And in the final finding, we use an experiment to try to tease out the underlying economic mechanism why those delivery features affects the investor's decision-making. And we find that the inaccurate beliefs explains 82% of what we find. To put it in plain language, what we mean is that you feel that through the delivery, all the appearance of those presenter, you get to actually update your beliefs about the quality of the startup, but your belief formation in this process are actually inaccurate and incorrect. You thought the passionate, enthusiastic people are of good quality, even though they're not. That explains why this is driving some potential biases, okay? So to put all those results in the visualization, therefore you know the flow of this paper, we're going to start by asking, does delivery feature matter? And we're going to show you, yes, it matters. We're going to then ask, well, does it actually affect, make you make better investment decisions? And the answer is no. In fact, we think it drives biases. This bias is first shown in a setting where we look at men versus women. And then we also use an experiment to show this is because of the inaccurate beliefs that are driven by those delivery features. Okay, that is how the paper is going to flow and how I'm going to follow up when presenting. Okay, so now let's go into some of the details. So the setting that we're going to use is to look at startup pitches, which is a very common form of persuasion in the financial market. In this specific case, we're going to look at startup pitches to accelerators. Those are 5 top US accelerators. And during the application process, the startups need to submit their pitches, which are typically 1 to 2 minutes long, very standard, where they're going to introduce their team, introduce their idea, and so on. And this is an important part of the application process. And one way to think about them is basically a short video pitch on Zoom. And the beautiful thing about this setting is that we not only observe the pitches, we actually can immediately observe the subsequent economic outcomes out of those interactions. Specifically, we look at the pitches. We can observe the investment decisions made by the accelerators. For the firms that are eventually invested, we actually can observe the future development of those startups as well, okay? It is this pitch, investment decision, further development that gave us the richness that we need in order to not only identify the effect of the pitch delivery, but also the detailed interpretations that we need, okay? And for each of those pitches, underlying them is one startup company. We also collect a lot of information about those startups from PitchBook, Crunchbase, and Venture Expert. We collect founder background from LinkedIn. In the end, for each of those startups that were making the pitch, we will be able to observe their industry, financing history, CEO turnover, founder education, work experience, and so on and so forth, okay? Clearly, the meat of this methodology is what we call the video as data approach. So let me spend a little time to introduce you how we are thinking about using video as the data input, and how that might be helpful for your own future research. Okay, and when we settled on a 3-step process that can help us to process video. The first step is what we call the decomposition and the representation stage. That is, after we got to the video, we first decompose them into 3 informational channels that are the visual dimension, that is how you look, where we extract the information as images at the frequency of 10 frames per second. That is, for each second of the video, we extract 10 frames of how you look as pictures. Then we also got to the audio file, and those audio file can give us 2 things. First, we get your vocal characteristics. That is basically how much energy, enthusiasm, and so on and so forth through looking at your audios. And also the audio file, after we put them into a speech-to-text algorithm, we can get the full script that you use when you're making the pitch. Therefore, we know the full textual information of this whole pitch. Okay, so this is the first step. That is, we extract 3 dimensions of information channels from a pitch video. Then the second step, okay, is basically process them one by one. Due to the limit of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I really recommend you read the paper if you're interested in this specific method. And we actually also have a package that is a simplified version of what we do to get all the interested researchers to get started to think about video data. And but to give you a sense of what we can train the machines to do for us to capture the dynamic features of the persuasion. For example, here we have 2 pictures or 2 frames from the persuasion. What we can analyze is that we can ask the machines to code the visual emotions of both of the startup founders during the pitches. For example, on the left-hand side, clearly both of them are very happy and positive. And here, this one shows a little bit of a nervous, and this one is a little bit nervous as well. Okay, so similarly, we can train the machines to help us to read the audio, the sound waves that we extracted from the audio file. For example, here on the left-hand side, you can see a presentation or a pitch that is a lot more energetic and enthusiastic compared to the one on the right. I actually have both of them on my website if you want to see or want to hear what I mean by an enthusiastic pitch, and the one that will put you to sleep. Here is a good example of how they look, okay? And then at the same time, you will also be able to process the verbal context. And what you can do is that you can use the well-established dictionaries, not only from business, but also from social psychology. And we're particularly interested in the ones from social psychology. That is, even though, okay, you are talking about similar stuff, that is, you're pitching your startup. And the type of words that you put into your script will sometimes make your pitch more friendly, engaging, and so on. For example, this is the one that we call a very warm and engaging pitch. And the reason is they use a lot of words like together, help, like, pleasing, appreciate, and thank. And all those small words, as we show in social psychology, actually make your pitch a lot more engaging and enthusiastic. Okay, so basically the 3 steps, okay, start from decompose them into 3 informational dimensions, then process them individually, and then the last step is to aggregate them back. Okay, we have all those different measures about your visual performance, vocal performance, and vocal performance. In order for ease of interpretation, we want to get one measure that can summarize how well you really did in this pitch. Okay, and what we use is that we use a factor analysis that allows us to capture the underlying quality of your pitch. And this can not only take out a lot of biases in those detailed measures, but also give us an easy interpretation when we do all our analysis. And surprisingly, this underlying pitch factor, which is the first principal component of this factor analysis, gives us all positive loads on the positive dimensions and negative loads on the negativity dimensions. What I mean is that you can see this pitch factor loads positively on your visual positive, vocal positive, arousal and balance. These are the vocal vocal passion. And similarly, it loads negatively on all the negative dimensions. Therefore, the naive interpretation of what this pitch factor really captures is the unobserved overall positivity and passion and enthusiasm that it is in the pitch. And in most of our analysis, we're going to focus on this one measure. I do want to kind of spend a little, given that the setting is about the future of financial info, therefore I do want to comment a little bit on the method and how it is different from the past method, and also how this can be useful in the future, okay? The main advantage of this video-based approach that is machine learning based, okay, is that first, it's very easy to scale up and it is very high in terms of empirical replicatability. Right? Think about a very easy alternative, which is to hire raters from, let's say, MTurk or using your undergrad student and so on to come and rate them, is that, well, every time you're going to hire a very different group of people to come and rate you, okay? Therefore, you don't know whether you will be able to replicate what you find earlier, and you don't know which is right. And at the same time, it's not easy to scale up because suddenly you say, oh, we got another batch of 1,000 videos, and how do we really do in order to scale it, okay? And also, the second advantage of this method is that what we are measuring is dynamic. Okay, that is, remember, the whole pitch is a dynamic process. Therefore, what we are really capturing here is how dynamically you are doing every 1/10 of a second, or even finer in the sound and textual thing. Rather than, let's say, you come in and let people rate how attractive this person looked like, how competent it looked like. It's a totally different animal. Okay, it's a totally different animal. So we also kind of do not need to rely on only thin slices of data. We don't need to focus on only one single channel. Therefore, this method, after introducing machine learning, or you want to call it AI, if you wish, this is the main methodological advantage for those of you who are interested in using video data. Okay, so now we have the data, we have the min measurement. The next important thing is to think about the results. So we have 4 of them. Hopefully I can go through them. The first one is the simple one, which is to think about, do delivery features in persuasion really matter for the future outcome? Here we are looking at the cross-section of all the startup pitches. Okay, on the left-hand side, we're going to capture whether the firm or the startup was chosen to be funded by the incubator. And on the right-hand side, the key explanatory variable is this pitch feature, right? We have this one pitch factor, but we also show results using detailed dimensions. And we also control all the measures on the right-hand side are standardized to mean 0 and standard deviation 1. In order to facilitate the interpretation. And we also put in accelerator Frick's effect in order to account for unobserved heterogeneity at the investor level. And the standard errors are clustered at the level of accelerator year, okay? And instead of boring you with the detailed tables, here is just why startup pitch factor matters, just in one graph. Here we cut all the pitches into 5 from lowest to highest quintile, from the lowest pitch factor, which is the more boring pitch, and the highest pitch factor. You can see that from here, from the lowest to the highest, the probability of getting funded increases by more than 100%, okay? And the 1 standard deviation increase in pitch factor in the regression way increase the probability of obtaining funding by 35.2%, okay? And is this because that we are omitting a lot of variables that could be correlated with the quality of your pitch and the startup's overall quality that the VCs are looking at? For example, maybe the good startups or the good quality startup founders just are more passionate and enthusiastic about their ideas. At the same time, VCs want to invest in the quality. Therefore, if we have those omitted variables, what we find is purely a bias. One way to look at this formally is to look at the way that the discrimination literature are looking at this problem. That is, we keep adding quality controls into our regression, and we not only look at whether our results remain there, but we look at how stable the coefficients are, right? Here, I'm presenting you two coefficients of the same regression that differs only by the orange one, okay, has a lot of controls. We have dozens of them, okay, that can approximately capturing the overall quality of the startup. And not only all the things remain very statistically significant, but the coefficients are remarkably stable, okay? What we interpret this, and we can do it more statistically using the formal test that we report in the paper. But what this means is basically what we show is not due to some sort of omitted quality bias. Instead, this pitch factor seems to be working quite independently as a separate factor that affects how investors are making their decision after they see your persuasive pitches. Okay, so this is the first part of the
clarifying question about what exactly is the ability variable that you have at the top?
Oh, yeah, we have your education, we have your work experience, we have your entrepreneurial experience, we have all those information for all your founders that were at present. Those are we have your gender, we have your industry experience, and so on and so forth. Basically, you have a overall set of what were used in earlier papers that were doing similar analysis. Okay, so this is the first finding. Then this already speaks against that, well, this is some sort of a quality measure that we're missing. The second finding focuses on understanding, well, is it because maybe a better pitch person can run a better startup? Because indeed, the ability to present and be attracting people's investment is a productive asset of startup founders. Then we look at, well, do those pitches that are warmer and more passionate is associated with a better, longer performance down the road? And the answer is no, okay? Here we use exactly the same framework. Here, the blue bar is reporting the analysis that I showed you earlier, okay, which is how those pitch factor is associated with the investment probability. You can see the higher the pitch factor, the more likely you're going to get invested. Well, the orange ones are look at, okay, the correlation between this pitch factor and the longer performance, like employment, VC, and like the getting large funding and whether you stay alive and so on. We see that conditional on funding, positive teams actually underperform. We do not say, right, this is causal, that the one who pitched better actually run a worse startup. What we show is basically the investors lowered their investment bar, okay, for teams who appear to be more passionate. As a result, down the road, as all the real quality got reviews, what happens is that those people just become less successful, okay, the ones that you lowered the bar for, okay? And right now we see, okay, it matters, it doesn't help you to make better investment decision. Now let's see whether this is due to some sort of a bias. And the first result that we show is through this gender result, which is, well, does this focus on the delivery features in your persuasion? Does this focus differ across subsamples with different social dynamics, like men versus women? Because we know women are judged more by non-substantive appearance, and women also face gender stereotyping and inequality, especially in the entrepreneurial setting. And what we find, what we're going to do in the test is to look at how pitch factor matters for the eventual economic decision making by the investors in a single gender teams, which is basically man only and woman only, versus the mixed gender team, that is the pitch factor, the mixed gender team, that is a man and a woman co-presenting together. And what I can show you here is that if you only focus on the top panel first, in the single gender teams, you can find that women are judged much more by this non-substantive delivery feature, okay? And or in other words, they're going to be punished more based on their pitch features if they do not show enthusiasm, warmth, and so on and so forth. Now, if we take a look at the bottom panel, which is to look at the mixed gender team, where the team has both female and male founders coexistence and presenting together, you can see that all the lows is on the man. In fact, the woman is driven very close to zero, and they're not statistically significant anymore. And what we find is that women are essentially ignored when they are co-presenting with man in the team, because what the man was, how the man was behaving together with the woman is mattering for the eventual economic decision. I perhaps have 1 or 2 minutes left, and therefore let me try to quickly go through the experiment and then conclude, okay? So in the final part of the paper, we run an experiment to replicate all that we found on Yale MBA students in that has basic training in business as well as venture capital. And but the beautiful thing about the experiment is that we actually can solicit their beliefs and ask why they're making the decisions that they're making after seeing certain features, okay? And what we find is that, this is the final result. What we find is that those pitch factor will make them believe, okay, those people have a higher probability of success, okay? It's not like I like interacting with certain type of people. Oh, I like interacting with happy people, therefore I want to make investment. No, in such a professional setting, it's more about their expected beliefs about their the quality of the startup, and we find that the pitch factor will make them feel those people are of higher quality, even though they're not. And this inaccurate inference of their quality actually drives 82% of the biases that we documented in this paper. So just to quickly conclude, we start from those 2 questions. Do delivery features in persuasion matter for economic decision-making, and through what economic mechanisms? And the key innovation of the method is to look at video as data input and capture a lot of features in this process. And we find that if they matter, they do not help you make better investment. They seem to drive biases that hurt underrepresented groups in this investment setting, and it is mainly through inaccurate beliefs channel. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to Camille's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Song, for the passionate delivery. And there are already questions lining up in the chat for later, so it's clearly also passion among the audience. But first, indeed, let's hear from Camille. So the screen is yours for 15 minutes.
Okay. Can you see my slides on the screen?
Yeah, not yet full screen, but they're there.
It should be now, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So thank you very much, Michel, for having me discuss this paper. So this very interesting and creative paper. So the question that is asked by this paper is not novel. It's an old question in the PE VC literature. So basically the paper asks how VCs invest in startups, but actually the answer given by the paper is actually novel, you know. I mean, like it asks like the question, so should investor persuade or convince, you know, VCs to invest in their startup? And if we go back, you know, to the etymology of these 2 words, so for example, the word convincere in Latin means to prove, and suggests that when you convince someone, so you use more rational arguments to convince them, and rational arguments, like in this literature, in the in entrepreneurial finance, would be, you know, for example, investment decision based on the past performance or the technical and scientific aspects of the project, or also another thing that matters in this literature is the composition of the entrepreneurial team. And by contrast, the word persuadere literally means to induce to do something, and we would translate it by to advise. And basically it suggests that here, like when you try to persuade someone, so you use more emotions and feeling. And this is actually exactly what the paper does. So this paper explains the VC investment decision by verbal, vocal, and visual factors beyond more traditional factors that are, for example, the education of these entrepreneurs, their prior work and entrepreneurial experience, or the team size. So the paper basically, I mean, Allen and Sons collected like video pitches that were recorded by real entrepreneurial teams to apply to incubators in the US. And they analyzed, these video pitches using machine learning algorithms, and they create like a unique data set in finance. So the main contribution of the paper, to my knowledge, it's the first paper in financial economics that shows the effect of non-verbal communication on investment decisions. So let me tell you a little bit more about the data, because this is something very novel in this paper. So they have more than 1,000 video pitches in the paper. So these pitches were recorded as part of an application to accelerators and incubators program in the US. They are publicly available. So, I mean, they retrieved the video on YouTube and Vimeo. So, I mean, that's actually impressive that, they got this idea, and this is very novel. And then they linked these video pitches to more traditional information in finance that comes from PitchBook and Crunchbase. Some interesting descriptive statistics about the sample is the fact that about 50% of these startups will receive VC funding at some point. And actually, the VC investment amount is pretty high, so this is interesting. And the average team size in their sample is about 1.7 co-founders in the team. About half of these startups are male only founded. About 27% of them, they are founded by female entrepreneurs only, and 24% of them are mixed gender teams. So the next question is, what is a video? And actually there is like a full section in the paper about, explaining about what is a video. And I learned a lot from this section. So a video is basically, some images, and you need to know, what is the resolution of this image to know the number of pixels. And then you need to multiply, the number of images per second times the length of the video, to know what is the dimension of the data set. Okay, plus you need to take into account also the audio component of the video, and overall, it's a very, very high dimensional, data set to process. I mean, just to compare, usually in finance we use like panel data set, and like the dimension would be just like the number of individual firms or whatever, times the time period. Okay, so which is much less than what they have to process. So the next question is how to process this information. So what they use in the paper are pre-trained machine learning algorithms. So they use 3 of them. So the first one, to process, the verbal aspect of the video is like this Google API algorithm plus some dictionaries, and they classify basically the text as positive or negative. They, for the vocal factor, so they use this Python algorithm, and they classify, the vocal, they classify the video as like vocally positive or negative, and same thing for the visual aspect of the video. So they use, this face plus private algorithm to classify the video as a positive or negative. Plus they can also, say something about like the beauty or the perceived beauty of this entrepreneur. So I was curious about like this face plus algorithm. So I tried it on this guy, Donald Trump. And what we can see from this picture is that like on the picture is like about 60% neutral and 38% anger. Okay, so clearly if he had to pitch for this project, so he would not be classified as a positive picture. Then with the algorithm, you can also infer, what is the age of of the person. So like on this picture, so he looks like a 70 years old man, so which is accurate since he is like in reality 74. So okay, so he looks even a bit younger than he is. And the last thing is like this beauty factor, and like according to this picture, so Donald Trump is about 65 out of 100 in terms of the beauty factor. I mean, it was just like, to have like an idea of like how like this face plus algorithm works. It's actually quite interesting, so you can try. And then like Allen and Song aggregates, these visual, vocal, and verbal factors together, and they create, this measure of pitch factor, and they regress like the likelihood of raising VC money on this pitch factor. And what you see is that there is like a positive relationship between this pitch factor and the likelihood of raising VC funding. Then they decompose this pitch factor in the three dimensions, okay, so vocal, visual, and verbal. And you see here that vocal and visual factors matter, but the verbal factor doesn't matter. And for robustness, so you see that the visual factor only remains when you control for the overall pitch factor. So this is really interesting, I think, and very novel. I mean, to explain, like the VC investment decision by these factors that we didn't have like previously in the literature. They also control, for more traditional factors like, the teams, the prior work experience, the education. Okay, so the second result of the paper is to look at the gender difference in terms of like the VC investment decision, and to explain it by this pitch factor. And what you see here is that if you split the sample between male, men only, and women only teams, basically women are more heavily judged on the pitch delivery, okay? But when the team is mixed, they are neglected. Okay, so which is also like a very interesting result, and this is in line, with what the current literature finds. And the next question is, are investors correct? I mean, there are two predictions. So first of all, positivity could be related, to more effort. And in this case, it would predict, better ex post performance conditional on raising VC funding. Okay, and the over prediction is that positivity is basically negatively related with unobservable entrepreneurial abilities. And in this case, it would predict, worse ex post performance. And this is actually what Allen and Song find in the paper. So the pitch factor is actually negatively related with some measure of ex post performance. So on the sample, of startups that have succeeded at raising VC capital, venture capital. Okay, and so startups with a high pitch factor basically underperform, and this is like this suggests that investors are biased. And then, they try to decompose between preference and biased beliefs, but I'm not going to discuss this aspect in this discussion. So my discussion is going to focus on, on the correlation beyond these three V factors. So I'll tell you more in a minute, and then I'll have like two additional minor comments that are more, discussion at a higher level. So, how like AI could be useful for the VC industry overall, and what can we say, about like the fact that some algorithms are biased, and then I'll have some additional comments. Okay, so the main contribution of the paper is to show that the effect of non-verbal communication on VC investment decisions. So they use this pitch factor, which is the aggregation of the visual, verbal, and vocal factors, and they control for more traditional factors that explain the VC investment decision. So education, prior work experience, the team size, and also the video resolution. So I have like a few questions. So first of all, so what is, the additional explanatory power of these three V factors beyond more traditional factors? So I was looking for that in the paper. I couldn't find it. And I think that would be like, interesting, like just to look at the R squared in this case. I was also wondering, how do these three V factors correlate with more traditional factors? And also I was wondering, in which industry or domains the 3V factors matter more. So we can think that in some industries, that are more technical or more scientific based, so they should matter more or less. So that would be interesting, to look at the cross-section by industries. Okay, and what can be done like beyond the 3V factors? So actually there is like a whole literature about non-verbal communication that is heavily present in the psychology literature, and I think that would be like super interesting, to look at this literature, because they have like some applications already, like in business, especially in marketing, in criminal law, education, and computer science as well. So basically, I looked at this literature about the nonverbal communication, and all I know is from this review paper that I found in the annual review of psychology. And there are like a lot of paper which investigate other aspects beyond the 3V. So for example, the effect of beauty on different decision making. So this is something that you have, but that would be interesting to show the coefficients in the regressions. Also, how do your 3V factors correlate with the personality traits, like what we call the big five, extraversion, openness. So and can you even measure this big five in your videos? I mean, that would be something probably interesting. Also looking at the variance, the pitch variance within individual, also as a way to look at the personality or interpersonal relationship, like you look at group difference between men and women, but that would be maybe there are other aspects to look at. The accent could also be a way to something interesting that could matter, like, and you could infer probably the nationality or the social background of these people. Smile has also been shown in this nonverbal communication literature as an important factor. You can also talk about like perceived intelligence. Anyway, so there are like many things that you could do with this video, and that and actually this literature about nonverbal communication could be very useful. Worth to mention as well, so in this nonverbal communication literature, so they talk about the zero acquaintanceship paradigm. And basically it says that individuals, they form their first impression of strangers. Okay, so this is the case in your study, and this is something that is heavily discussed in this literature. And something interesting is that basically people, apparently they form their judgment or their impressions about people in 100 microseconds, so which is I think interesting. So they also discuss, what are like the weaknesses of this non-verbal communication studies, and in particular the fact that in the list of traits of or characteristics studied is potentially endless. So in this study you choose like the visual, vocal, and verbal factors. So I think it makes sense, but like it's a choice at the end of the day. And also the results are heavily dependent on the measurement, on the algorithm you select. So that's something that I think you should discuss. It's also difficult, to make a causal statement in this type of studies. So for example, there is, I found this paper that tries to predict like the company's profits with CEOs' faces, okay? So which is clearly, which they clearly should interpret as a correlation and not a causation. Or like this other paper that tries, to make a causal statement about CEOs aging and stress. So I think it is also something that is related to your paper. And another weakness is the difficulty to interpret, these coefficients because of this measurement that is linked to the selected algorithm. So my suggestions would be like to look at the R-squared, of the regression with different set of variables, to speak about the explanatory power of these 3V factors, to investigate, the correlations between the 3Vs and other traditional factors. I think that would be interesting, to interpret the sign instead of the coefficients, and to discuss, I think, this non-verbal communication literature. Okay, so I'm going to skip this one. And my second comment basically is about the fact, do VCs like use
1 minute for me.
Okay. Okay, so maybe, okay, so I'm going to discuss that one. Okay, do VCs use machine learning? And the anecdotal evidence suggests that yes, some funds use them. And where can the technology be useful in this VC industry. So especially for the pre-screening, it could be useful to gather information, or even we can develop, some data-driven approaches to evaluating startups. Okay, and the next question is, are algorithms more reliable than humans? So I mean, there are some evidence that basically early stage investors, so they rely on heuristic, for gauging potential success, and machine learning assistants can make the decision maybe more consistent. But I mean, there is also an emerging literature that shows that algorithms are biased themselves. Okay, so they are not in particular equally trained on minority group. Okay, which creates like some cross-sectional difference in the screening efficiency. Okay, and also the choice of variables that enter the algorithm is important in this case. And there is like this very interesting paper by Adermors and co-authors that basically try, to detect a biased algorithm. And if you want to, I mean, like a way to detect algorithm is basically, to look at the correlation between the residuals, the regression residuals, and, for example, a particular characteristic that doesn't enter the initial selection model. And it's a way, to show that potentially there is no bias in the way the algorithm is constructed. So I'm going to skip this one. And to conclude, so what the paper shows is that entrepreneurs who show more positivity, who have a high pitch factor, are more likely, to raise VC funding, but they are also more likely, to underperform ex post, which is a way, to speak about the fact that investors may be biased and may have, in particular, biased beliefs. So the key ingredients of this study are like the video pitches that are collected by Allen and Song. So the machine learning algorithms that are used to process the data, and also the use of this non-verbal communication literature in finance. So my suggestion to improve the paper would be to investigate, more like the explanatory power of these 3V factors, to discuss, the potential biases of pre-trained algorithm, and also to talk to actual VC, to make them aware of your algorithm, which would be a way, to improve like the pre-screening potential. So thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you, Camille. I can give you 1 minute to respond, Song, if you like to pick up on anything from the discussion.
Okay, well, wonderful. First of all, thank you very much, Camille, for such a careful discussion. And I look forward to seeing the slides. Clearly, you skipped a lot of stuff during this presentation. And I do want to make 2 notes regarding actually the 2 things that you highlighted. The first one is about the correlation with the non-verbal communication literature. I guess the key difference between our approach with what you discussed about the CEO faces and so on and so forth, which perhaps is a useful literature. But the key difference is that we highlight in the paper is that we're trying to capture the dynamic features in your persuasion, basically how your motion and the dynamic features in this talk matters, as opposed to how attractive you look like, how beautiful you look like, and so on. Those is what we categorize as the static features in your face. And we consider them to be not the focus of this paper, and they have a fundamental difference. In fact, when we put in the beauty factor into the analysis, the beauty would carry some load, as the beauty premium literature would suggest, but it works very independently compared to the dynamic features, which is how you show over this 1 minute, and so on. That is a key difference between what we try to capture and what is in the nonverbal communication literature. But we guess we should flesh that out a little bit more and make the discussion more clear. The second is algorithm bias, which is something we definitely were worried about, especially in the gender results. And what we did is we tried different algorithms, and we have a whole not a whole section, it's a small section that discuss a little bit about that. And in fact, if there's what we argue is that if we show that the differences of those measures in our setting are fairly stable, robust across different algorithms, as well as trying to think about the statistical implications if there were any biases. And we definitely should acknowledge there's a room for algorithm discrimination, but hopefully it's not driving most of our results. Thank you again, and I really appreciate all the time that you spent on the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Song. And so when I look at the number of questions we got, I think the Q&A will easily spill over into the post-webinar chat that we usually have. So perhaps let me just first thank Song and Camille one more time for their presentations and for contributing to this webinar series. So it's been a great fall season, I have to say, and so we're going to have a little break now, and we'll be back in February. So stay tuned for the schedule updates on the website. And also, if you would like to suggest yourself or someone you know who has nice work that could be presented in the series, there's also there's a form actually on the website that you can use to make these suggestions.